my reading of the film, which resonated with me, which is my time spent in Thessaloniki, which is the second largest city in Greece, in case you don't know, which is also a post-Ottoman city. There was this discovery of this huge Egnatios Roman alleyway underneath the city. It was meters long. It was really a phenomenal discovery. But because of there was going to be a metro station built right over where this discovery was made, the Ministry of Culture decided to move all these antiquities. Imagine discovering a whole ancient road and then moving it away. And even though there was a lot of activists, a lot of political arguing, that, this is the biggest discovery ever, they decided to move it and replace it. And like every time I see this film, I think of this movement and this erasure, and what a shame that the Ministry of Culture didn't think of creating a parade, at least, of all these monuments through the city, and then just hurried them off in order to replace them. So then I wanted, talking about my context, to turn to Sena and ask the context, her context for this film, where it's rooted in her city.
Okay. Thank you, Maria-Thalia. And for me, I think what inspired me was that this part of Istanbul is frequently changing, and buildings and monuments outlive people, and they're always repurposed for another purpose. Like even since I moved to Istanbul in 1998, Beyoğlu's face completely changed. Historically, it was populated by the non-Muslim population in the Ottoman Empire. It used to be very alternative when I first came to Istanbul, with like bars and I don't know, like after Galatasaray you were a bit afraid to move on to Tünel. But nowadays it's more like a shopping mall for the Middle Eastern tourists. A friend of mine told me in order to understand Turkey, where Turkey is at right now, you need to check where Beyoğlu is. So I had this idea of creating rings of Beyoğlu as if it went through an earthquake or a bombing, both of which happens unfortunately in Turkey. And I made this work before the earthquake. My show opened like 4 days before the earthquake. The earthquake didn't affect Istanbul, but still I felt the need to say that to many visitors of the exhibition. I thought about ruins, and then I thought about young people carrying these ruins, passing through Beyoğlu. And we realized this as a one-shot performance actually. But we were interrupted by the police, because it's a political place, especially the main Taksim Square is very political. There has been many demonstrations there, some of which turned out to be bloody, unfortunately, and therefore it's a very politicized place, and you're not allowed to do anything these days around this area. There is a lot of police barricades. In case you noticed, even in the video, you can see 3-4 barricades by the police.
Do you want to, I know Istiklal well, and it is an area where there's been a history of demonstrations, and I think I myself once passed through a big Kurdish demonstration in the past. What is the process of walking, demonstrating, and bodies walking with ruins in relation to this idea of using the city as a place to resist or revolt or...
I think this was one of the things that tempted me to make this performance, because everything, like demonstrating anything, is absolutely forbidden these days. Like even the non-problematic demonstrations of the past, like 8th of March, Women's March, is now turning into like, it's not allowed, and there are clashes with the police. I've been gassed the last time I attended this night walk by women. So I thought about passing through Istiklal with ruins, as if also they are carrying banners. And the video falls into black fade-ins, fade-outs. Each time there's a fade-in, fade-out, actually we're stopped by the police, and I'm, negotiating, telling them some small lies that I'm a sculptor, I'm carrying my works, we want to film it, things like that. And then what the police care about was, they took our photos, they reported to their senior police officers, and they were always saying, no, there are no banners, it's just sculpture. It doesn't say anything. And like this, with personal incentives of the police, we could go on until the end. But it was risky. They could have stopped us in the beginning. They spotted us very early on. I was amazed. One thing I realized doing this is I thought I had a really good plan. I was staying away from the group. We were filming away from the group in the beginning. But the police immediately found me. And I asked them, like in 5 minutes or so, how did you know that it was me? And then he said, Madam, this is an organized action, and you're the leader of this group. The secret police said. Like in 5-10 minutes, they knew.
Well, surveillance.
Yes.
So the history of to continue this thought about what Istiklal means and the demonstrations that I imagine there's been for Carras, there's been Taksim, there's been Taksim Square, which was a fundamental point, I think both for Istanbul but also the history of what happened later. How do these ruins become a form of resistance? I mean, we've been talking a lot about that.
Yes.
And this idea of George Zilberman and ruins and how they last and what they mean.
Ruins talk about, in general, I'm always attracted to ruins because they talk about a history that's been long gone. They resisted the erasure of time, and they narrate or remind a different time and a different life, let's say. This was the case where I grew up also. I grew up in Denizli, in western Turkey, which is really close to two ancient Greek towns, Laodicea and Hierapolis. And we had this very organic relationship to ruins. Like I learned swimming in a Roman pool next to like swimming over Roman columns, and I thought it was the most normal thing. Or we used to picnic within the ruins. However, we didn't talk about them, yet they were there. So I see ruins in such a way. And of course there's also the influence of everything falling apart, or at least the feeling of everything falling apart in Turkey at the moment. Like while I was preparing for this exhibition, there was a blast in Beyoğlu. And then of course, it affected the eastern or southern part of Turkey, but there was a huge earthquake. We have an economic crisis. We have some political crisis. So I think it's a way to also feel powerful. Like what is dispersed can start something new, can be the beginning of something new. Also, for example, the ruins they are carrying. I did walks in Istiklal and I picked parts of certain buildings and monuments. For example, the guy in the orange sweatshirt, the thing he's carrying is a sculpture that's made by Shadi Çılık, that's in front of Goethestraße, that's almost next to Goethestraße High School, right in the middle of the street. And it was built to commemorate the 50th year of the Republic. However, later on, Saturday mothers, who are the relatives, mothers and loved ones of people who were lost, who died due to forced disappearances in the 90s, and they protest even to this day to keep their memories and their alive and their cases open. They used to gather around this sculpture. But now, since demonstrating there is forbidden, it's under barricade, so you cannot reach the sculpture at all. So I wanted to grab a hold of it too. It's forbidden to enter next to the sculpture right now, but there he is. He has his piece and he's walking away.
So it feels like almost here you're grabbing pieces, fragments of the past, embodying them and saying them,
Yes.
that they're still part of your life.
Yes. Yes.
And but also interestingly, there's this element of a parallel between the sculptures and performativity. I mean, because they're performing sculptures.
Yes.
And they're also almost like theatrical props.
Yes.
Also.
Yes.
So it's like a set which is being carried, almost like it's almost humorous, but at the same time quite dark, because they're retracting something which you're forbidden from touching, from remembering. I imagine the references are also to the Greek history, I don't know, different elements which are in the structures.
Yes. There are a lot of neoclassical buildings in this area from the beginning of 20th century. And the sculptures, monuments, buildings, they are solid. They live longer. And political structures are also hanging on longer than a human life sometimes. What I told the young performers was, like, imagine you come from the future and you're walking around ruins of Istanbul. And then just like you find pebbles on the beach or something, you pick a piece of ruin that you like. And I want you to walk like you don't care much about what's going on around you. I wanted them to look careless, but I wanted them to go on like they're like off to do something. We don't know what, but we know they need these pieces and they will do something with them or they will preserve them. And I think it's something hopeful. There is hope about this.
There is some hope, I guess. But I'm also interested in going deeper into this idea of like the correlation between the history of performance, or thinking about performance and thinking about bodies and thinking about moving bodies, because your work often entails moving bodies.
Yes.
Often your body. So here you've chosen 5 younger physicalities to walk and also correlated to something which is objects which have remained in the city no matter what, despite the many erasures, despite the many historical phases, despite the politics. So this correlation of movement and staticness, or moving forward and holding on to the past, creates a tension which I think is often in your work,
Yes.
particularly so in this one.
Yes, in my work I am very much interested in finding ways of regeneration and regenerating something that's dead, frozen, stale, lost. And I think recently, especially in my artistic research, I'm believing it more and more that movement is a key to regeneration. That's why they are moving forward. Actually, this is how we met with you. I performed my performance piece, Slalom, at Carras. And Slalom is about regenerating institutional archive. It works with the question, what will happen to all this information that's accumulated if we're running out of time due to the climate crisis? Like, who will have the time and resources to regenerate these archives? Because archives essentially are dead if you don't interact with them, if you don't narrate them, and it requires lots of time and effort to regenerate them. And you have this economic data. Carras houses...
Stavros the area, because also there's Stavros the space that I run, but there's Stavros is an area in Athens which was founded actually interestingly by refugees from Asia Minor who passed over the Taurus mountains. So they were originally from Turkey. So the whole area is named from these mountains in Turkey. So there's a bank which has its archives, which is all the industrial history of Greece. So we did research along with Sena, and we discovered all the data of the imports and exports, taxation, and kind of a sort of a scanning of the financial history of Greece. Hard numbers, which was very interesting in relation to Sena's work, slalom, which was what we were working on, which was thinking about acceleration and thinking about moving forward and how fast we're moving forward and how exactly, which correlates to this film as well, how there's this idea of progress and constantly moving faster and faster and faster to the point where we're at a breaking point, and how and whether it's possible to slow down. So this idea of time and acceleration and the tension again with this archive, which in this case isn't archives but it's monuments.
Yes. I think these monuments are similar to the economic data, like in terms of like interaction, like as a body, as a person, as Sena. It's very hard to break into like economic growth data of Greece after the Second World War and interact with it, make meaning out of it, say something about it. I think there was, like, as you say, your exhibition also was based on this idea. There was the idea of non-linearity. And this exhibition had several openings.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was right after the pandemic. And we first met during the pandemic and we talked about this idea. The exhibition didn't have a beginning and an ending in a classical sense. It kept on having openings. And so the performers in slalom, while I read the economic data, they mimic the bodily movements of a slalom skier, and in a slowed down mode, of course, and they maneuver around it. And there are 3 trials. Sometimes they fail, sometimes they successfully maneuver about them, because the idea was to investigate how to slow down when you're going really fast. This fast movement is a linear movement. We all feel like we're going towards something and we have to be fast. That's why actually here I wanted the performers to look a bit careless and casual. Because marching, parades, I've been part of many while I was in high school and middle school and even kindergarten. And there was a little bit of militaristic vibe to our marches in the national holidays. And you always had a uniform, or we used to dress up in the same costume and stand up really straight, move right leg, left leg, like move your arms like a soldier.
So you're talking about a representation of a nation state, and here there's another form of youth which has another embodiment.
Yeah, doesn't march towards a future like that, I believe. There is also, like, this is connected to the idea of young bodies representing a nation state. In the monuments of the early Republic and paintings in the early Republic days, there's always sporty young people carrying torches or flags and let's say around Atatürk. Even in the monument in Taksim Square, where they end up in the end, you can see the young people following him. Young people always represent the future, and there was so much responsibility on their shoulders and so much meaning attached to these young bodies. However, the narration of history, this arrow mode of progress, just like in this economic development data of Greece, has shifted so much, it's hard to tell where we are going anymore, and like, is it the same country that I was born into? What's going on? Yeah, like they look, I think, dedicated. However,
but they're not going anywhere.
But they're not going anywhere specific. Yet still, I believe they will find a way. Yes.
Which is what we were talking about with slalom as well, which is essentially this idea that maybe they're in this idea of futurity and the idea that we're working towards some idea of a future which is now being denied to younger generations, to us, and how one can rethink, and if it is possible to rethink this idea of a linear narrative, and whether we can start thinking not in cycles but in less sort of straightforward terms.
Yes, less linear.
But also, which goes back to the ruins, and the city which all this work is born from, and this idea of you trying to understand it and trying to reflect on it. And I think we were talking earlier today about how often when you are in Istanbul, you also feel like you don't recognize it. And that even though it's a place you've been to again and again, somehow you feel othered there. You feel like as if you no longer recognize certain elements in it. So even the city itself is constantly revolving.
Yes. Yeah, there is this.
And there's a form of slow violence in a way,
It is a form.
But there's an erasure happening.
Yeah, there is an erasure happening, definitely, and it is a slow violence. I agree. It's not even slow anymore. I think after 2013, especially, the city and the country has been changing really fast. And even today here, there are many people I know from Istanbul who migrated to Berlin. There is this idea of heaviness and lightness in this performance too. When I exhibit this performance video in the exhibition space, I exhibit it together with the ruins, it is supposed to be, they're supposed to be really heavy, but as you say, like theater props, they're made out of styrofoam, so they're really light. So my practice in general is about healing, and I'm trying to find ways to not describe the heaviness of things, but to find a way around things, to offer an experimental resolution, let's say.
Which is, again, reflected in most of your work. I don't know if any of you are aware of Sena's previous work, where she works with herself a lot, and often works also with archives again. But there's a process of your self-healing through your relationship to archives. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, but also the movement from your body to somebody else's, also your relationship to things, and then how you break up this distinction between yourself and things and objects also.
Yeah,
because I think you talk about it a little bit. You were reading Arjuna about,
I can't pronounce it.
where you talk about things, persons and things not being categorized, and this idea of opening up into a more pluriversal understanding of the world, where us and other things are not separated.
Yeah. This has been a continuation of an artistic research, and I was working with institutional archives. I'm interested still in institutional archives, but then this takes me to personal material that I accumulate. At some point after my solo show in 2018, I had a time where I worked with an actual archive. Right after my solo show, I found a job at Hrant Dink Foundation. He's an Armenian journalist who was assassinated in 2007. And the foundation were working on building a memory site in his name. And I was employed as one of the creative team to build this memory site. So the resources, of course, archives. That's why I'm drawn to objects and archives, because when you're working with regeneration, when you want to regenerate something dead or frozen or stale or forgotten, let's say, the only thing you can hold on to that stays intact between life and death is the archive. And that's what struck me about Hrant Dink's family and friends. As soon as he was assassinated, they made a call to the public to bring any information, photographs, any archival material, video recordings of him, and they started building an archive to create something to hold on to after his passing. And when we were creating a memory site, of course that was our material. So I had this actual experience with the archive, and there I realized how time consuming and effort, like how much effort it requires to narrate something using an archive. I was editing most of the videos in the memory site, and like to edit a 2-minute, 3-minute legible video on a topic, you need to watch like 2-3 weeks of videos, you know. And that made me question, well, how will all these institutional archives be activated? We don't have time, you know. But then it also made me question my own belongings. When you try to sort somebody else's archive, I think it happens to academicians who work with the archive too. When you go back home, you start to become concerned about what you're accumulating. Not that I'm important, but it's like, even on my phone, I'm accumulating all these images, and I can't keep track of them after a while. You know, sometimes the phone gets stolen, or it crashes, and I lose them, but then like, they keep on accumulating. And so I started to be interested in objects and things I'm accumulating as my personal archive. And I was thinking about what will happen to them. So this is an exercise on impermanence and death. And it sounds depressing, but it's not actually. It can be really freeing too. I read the book of Marie Kondo, the Japanese tidying up master, and started throwing things away, and I thanked them before I throw them away, which is important. So I started making work like that, and then I realized like objects also move. They change hands. Okay, buildings are hard to move. Political structures, like a country's economy, is a solid structure, more or less. But like all these things you accumulate, you throw them away, somebody else finds it, you borrow from your friend, it becomes yours, you know. They travel too. And I started to think about also their journey, and I started to think about this movement as mutual. Bodies move, and I believe in the potential of bodily movement, but also object moves. So it's like a choreography around each other. That's why my show's name is Inevitable Choreography, and it's a choreography on impermanence.
Which obviously begs the question then, I mean, we're talking about choreography and impermanence, and obviously this work reflects a political state, but also a state of impermanence of, you say that cities cannot move, and then, you know, we've seen that cities can move.
Yeah.
And so therefore, in a way, this is both a precursor, but also a postscript for possibly your movement, other movements, and this, in other words, your research into movement is almost like foretelling how we might all be living, you know, and this precarious state of uncertainty.
Yes, yes, it's a movement across time that I'm thinking about.
How are we doing?
How are we doing?
Good. I don't know. For me, yeah, we can also have questions from
Yes.
the audience.
Would the audience have any questions? Yes, please.
I have a first question, but I think it's an appropriate first question. I want to hear more stories about each of these pieces. You picked out 5 of the ruins,
Yes,
and we only heard one story.
yes.
And I'm sure you had other options, but you came down to choose only 5. And so I'm curious to hear about them.
Yeah, like that one story I told about is the most special. Like I was tempted to create a piece of it because you can't even approach this sculpture. It's like blockaded by the police at all times. But the rest is more or less reflecting the neoclassical heritage in Istiklal Street. Like there's a Corinthian column head. There were many examples of it throughout the street, so I picked one of it. It was in front of the French embassy at the entrance of Istiklal. And I also like this image because it looks like a caryatid.
Yes.
And there are lots of caryatids attached to buildings in Beyoğlu too. This column is similar to columns in front of Galatasaray High School. Marmara marble is used a lot in this kind of architecture. And this yellow corner of a building that the girl in purple is carrying is one of the buildings, like it's just the balcony corner of a building, but it's like one of these buildings would turn into a shop. Like basically all the historic facade is turning into a shopping mall facade. And the guy in the front is carrying a really generic piece that you could see in any torn down building. Actually, it made me feel strange because some of these pieces I built in my studio, but because of time, some of them were built by somebody else, and I built that one in the front. And like it later on made me uncomfortable. I worked on building this piece of building right before the earthquake in my studio because that's all you saw, a piece of rubble. For a while, it was very weird and traumatic. The name of my exhibition is Possibilities of Healing, and then there was a huge wound. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I want to just share a thought. Maybe it's quite obvious, but I mean, the material of the props, styrofoam, also has an economy, right? And I find it so interesting how it's been carried through this open air mall, because it's the material with, which is normally not visible that way, in which goods are transported and are crossing borders. And it's also, I feel, a material which has to do with beaches.
Oh yes. Yes.
So I wondered, if you want to. I think it's the only piece you did with styrofoam, right?
No, there is one more piece I did with styrofoam. I carved out my own feet from styrofoam, but there I don't hide the styrofoamness of the styrofoam. And they float on a body of water. It looks like, when you meet the work in person, it looks like a floating pair of feet and it looks like a miracle, but then you're like, oh, it's styrofoam. So, but it makes you go back and forth with this idea. So that's something I do in my, it's a repeating theme in my practice, that I try to create this miracle-like moments using very cheap tricks. Here I really try to hide their styrofoamness, to be honest. I was more concerned about them looking heavy but being really light. But I like styrofoam, I don't like that it's so polluted for the environment. Of course, I don't like seeing styrofoam all the time on beaches. However, as a material that's so light, I've used it 2 times.
Well, it adds a comic element
Yes.
to the performance, which has a certain gravity, but at the same time it gives it a lightness, as you said.
Yes.
And it makes it more theatrical.
Makes it more theatrical, yes.
And more performative in the sense of it's as if they're, as I told you, they're almost like clowns or comedians walking to a theatre.
Mm-hmm.
And by chance they happen to be carrying a stage set with them.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Hi, first of all, thank you for the conversation. I have 2 questions. One is that, unfortunately, I wasn't in the exhibition in Ukraine when you have shown this video as well, but I can't remember. Have you also shown this sculptures in the room as well? Or
Yes.
Okay. And what do you think it's changed? When we are seeing video, for instance, I personally really enjoy the fact that I can see the sculptures and I only see them during the movement. And you also mentioned a lot about, you know, performance sculpture and this being a prop in a way. But how was the feeling for you in a way when you positioned it in the room? That would be my first question. And I also have a second question, which is like more rooted to the Beyoğlu itself, because you also know that I'm also really obsessed with the district, as lots of people are from Istanbul. And the question of mine would be that like the monuments are mostly some level of reference points that we are having in the history that is not necessarily written by us, but we somehow find a meaning to them, like, you know, like early Republic time or like a certain archaic time in the history that like you need to find an importance in it. But
Yeah.
at the same time, we also have, as you mentioned, the personal archive in the city itself. That like, for instance, you mentioned that back in the day in 1980, you could only go to Goethestraße, and then after that it would be a bit dangerous. And my question would be, what are, or is there any kind of monumental places? It could be a cafe, it could be a corner, it could be like a stone that you have seen that the meaning doesn't change during the time in Beyoğlu and you constantly want to see or feel or be there. Is there any reference point for you in Beyoğlu?
That I can trust. That's
Yes, exactly. That like that is timeless for you. That every time you go there, there's a certain element or a certain meaning that you always look for.
Thank you for your questions. These props are suspended in air with like invisible threads in front of the video. When I put up this work as an installation, there I want to see how realistic they look and also the audience to see. And also, like, I want that play between lightness, heaviness be visible there as well. Regarding your question, actually, even though some places are still intact and there, like some restaurants, some cafe, you know, it's part of a body of a street, a lifestyle, and all that. Things are changing. For let's say you go to the same cafe, but your friend has moved to Berlin, so it doesn't matter if the cafe is intact or something like that. Like, there was one place I really thought would not change and I could always go there even though an atomic bomb exploded. The next day I would go there and like, things would be like going on as normal. That was Boğaziçi University for me. And it was never affected by the turmoil outside of the school. However, it's also changed. And that was a moment for me, like, in which I found it hard to accept, you know, that it's actually, like, I can't put it in another way, I guess, destroyed. One of my ex-students, I used to teach there, told me, will we meet again when this becomes an expansive hotel in the lobby and have Nescafe together? And I was like, you know, it was funny, like a bitter joke. But, you know, I think it's good to accept. Like, how I made peace with this is that there will be something else maybe. Yeah, it's hard to let go of things sometimes, but if you don't let go of things you can't control, it's such a heavy thing to carry. Like, it's a block of concrete. And so I was like, you know, making a joke about it is sometimes good and sometimes like hoping like they're going somewhere with these ruins. Who knows what will they build? Or will they build something? Maybe he will use it as a coffee table or, you know.
I think that's the point in the cities that we share, Sena and I, is that with every period these objects are reused. So you have a Byzantine church made out of classical monuments. Then you have a modernist building which is built with slabs from a cemetery, and so on and so forth. So history is recycled.
Yes.
And there in that there is a positive, a regenerative narrative.
Yes.
Is the one that Sena is looking for. It is a form of healing. The fact that every time, in some points there's erasure, but it's also recreation in some way.
I mean, we have to believe in it, otherwise it's too depressing.
Although if you asked me the same question, I would say the only building in Athens I would be sure would never change is the Acropolis. Which is pretty depressing, I suppose. Everything else could be erased, but that would still be standing.
Like, sorry, but like I just I really find this interesting that like the monuments are mostly there to represent a certain level of idea that would never change in a way, that is like really epic in a way.
Yes.
And that's why I was like a little bit curious about the fact that like what's the epic or the myth in your life that would never change and also be timeless. But I also enjoyed your answer in a way that you find comfort not things that are being timeless, but things that are being changing, and accepting the fact that the change is always there, and that's comforting for you, which is like quite interesting and essential to your work, I have a feeling. I don't know. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
I find it really interesting when you talk about reactivating your archive, and how would you then elaborate your artistic approach and artistic research when it comes to rewrite the history of the already written history through the archive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like many of us, I don't trust like one of my observations during this Rounding Foundation experience was that I was amazed at how many different versions of this person you could create using the same archive. Like you could make Rounding look more, let's say, Armenian nationalist. You could make Hrant look lefty, like more. Like you could emphasize his being a good father. I don't know, like it could stretch in many ways, and I would attend these meetings with his family and his friends and supporters. And people wanted to see different narratives. Like these meetings would sometimes be really like, you know, it should be told like this should be there, there shouldn't be there. So of course every story told, every narration that's made using the archive is fictive. And I'm also interested in this, and I have a work that I made out in the shape of a giant eraser, a pelican eraser, a German eraser. And the eraser emits the official radio station of the government, the news channel at all times. So an eraser by its nature depletes as it erases. So like I'm working with the question, who are we if we're continually retelling the past? Because the narration of history changes so fast in Turkey. Names of streets and main squares in cities have changed, you know. So this is definitely one of my research areas. Yes, please.
I have a question, because my first impression was like those people, maybe they want to make fun of conservative. Because let's leave to people what they want to present something very old, some very old rules or so. It could have been other. Have there been any conservative people who were like, finally they do something right?
Yeah, they're like, could be. I'm not against this reading. I would totally be okay with it. Any other questions?
I think also that this idea of looking at Hrant Dink and how many stories and how many myths can be created out of his archive, I think brings you back to your latest work, which is almost like a form of self-portraiture as well.
Ah, yes.
Which is this idea of like all the objects that circulate around you, but we were talking about movement and bodies and objects, how in the end they become part of a multiple narrative which isn't fixed. You're allowed to be ambiguous and open, and you have a fan with these photographs that go, which is a very literal understanding of everything that you've been talking about.
Yes.
So going from Hrant Dink's archive to archiving yourself, and also discovering that there isn't one archive of yourself.
Yes, you're right. Like my recent show, which is still open, revolves around objects, and I introduce wind into the exhibition space. There's several fans, and one of them in the entrance is a vintage fan, and on the blades are my portrait photographs that are actually blocked with paint, and it's turning at a slow rate. But these are different Senas across time, and Sena's story could be narrated differently, yet it's always moving. Thank you, Maria-Thalia.
Thank you very much for the talk. Yeah, I also would like to say that in the other space we have also a video of Isaac Chong-Wai, and we will have a conversation between him and curator Susanne Weiss here on the 17th of February. So for the next one, you're also very welcome to return. Let's have a glass of wine and talk a bit.
Thank you. Thank you.